The story of creation is captivating, and there are 2 points that I'd like to bring out today. First, I can just see God rolling up his or her sleeves, looking over the design plans, grabbing a cup of coffee, and then getting to work. I have no doubt that it was hard work to create all the diversity that we see. I want to take a moment of personal privilege and take a short detour to talk about gender, and specifically about the gender of God. Some of you may have noticed that in our reading today we use the word she. Most of us here grew up with a God who was totally and completely male. Jesus grew up with a God that was totally male, from head to foot and all the parts in between. We use pronouns like he, him, his, and terms like Father, King, Lord. All of these words paint a picture of a very masculine God. Back in the day, back in Jesus' day, the Jewish culture honored all things masculine. The men were at the center and in control of everything, including the women and the children. The world around men revolved around men in so many ways, and so it was natural that they viewed God as a guy and wrote to substantiate him. When I was growing up, my God was older, more mature, had a robe, long white beard. I'm sure you've seen the picture. He had a booming voice, the kind that would smite people. And it was easy to see that the power and the majesty belonged to a king. I hope in the future that as a church, we can begin to have some more dialogue in depth and continue to explore a God on so many other different levels. Take God out of the box, if you will. In the meantime, I do want to point out in Scripture what it says in the 6th verse, which is relevant for me today. It says, God created humankind in his image, and this is in the original translation. In his image, in the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. The question that pokes out at me is, if I am a woman, a female, and I was also made in God's image, then shouldn't there be a little part of God that's also female? After all, it says God created them, which would include both male and female, and all of our siblings in between that spectrum. God created each and every one of us, and God reflects all of us in our magnificent diversity. This is what I believe, but it does not, please hear me, this does not have to reflect what you believe. Okay? What we believe is very personal to us. But I want to thank you for allowing me this openness to listen. And now let's get back to our story. So God created the earth and everything that we see around us. Hidden in these verses is the source of all living things. The earth, the sky, the plants, the animals. And if God created all of nature, I've got to ask myself, is all of creation good? Is all of creation good? And everything that God created, he said it was good. But did she mean everything? Does this goodness include floods, tornadoes, hurricanes? I have never in my life heard anyone say, thank God for that tornado last night. When it comes to human life, tornadoes can create much pain and death and destruction. But on the other hand, I'm sure you know, there's some good in these acts of nature. It all depends on your perspective. For example, if we're talking about a land that has been used and reused and abused and depleted of every nutrient it has, a flood will bring new life and replenishment to the land. Floods will dump sand and silt and debris and nutrients that is carried downstream from surrounding areas. And when the waters recede, the soil is left so much more fertile because of the organic mineral that's been deposited there. Hurricanes are also good. They can cause inland plant life to be replenished, break up red tides, bring necessary rain, and even balance the atmosphere between the North and South poles with the equator. But I can attest to the destruction as well. I wouldn't have said this in 1999, but while vacationing in St. Martin in the Caribbean in 1999, Hurricane Lenny, the eye of the storm, passed over our little itty-bitty tiny little island. I was never more frightened in my whole life. We stayed in this little cabin, and the winds were 155 miles an hour. Now, if you can imagine, storms around here are 70, 80, 90. They're pretty terrible. But picture it twice as forceful as that. The trees were bent like this. And we stayed in a little cabin, and I would have sworn it was just going to pick us up and dump us right in the ocean. And, you know, it's not Kansas anymore. I was scared to death. So all of creation can be good, but I tell you, it's sometimes hard, very hard to find that good. It's easy to find goodness in the things that really bring us pleasure. Now, if I was to ask you to name something that shouts out goodness for you, what would you say? In all of creation, what would you say? Come on. Sunshine. Children.
Cats.
Cats. Cats, even after, right? What was that, Nina?
Gravity.
Gravity, okay. What else? Good things.
Rainbows.
Rainbows, yes.
Sunshine.
Sunshine. Trees, flowers, each other, people, right? It's also fascinating to me that no one in the room said bugs, snakes, or I was in Scotland, sheep poo. There was a lot of that. We had to have our shoes disinfected when we came back into the country. But we have a tendency not to think about those things. But where would we be without the bugs and the snakes and the sheep poo? Right? People in Scotland depended on sheep poo because then it became, what do they call that? They burn it? Peat. It heated their homes. I mean, it's all connected, but we have a tendency not to think about it. When I think about the creation stories, it's fascinating to me that we have this one in the Old Testament, but there are so many other creation stories. They range, you know, from creating the world out of nothingness, which is what our Christianity believes. God saw the void and created. To stories about creating from another world, such as the Hopi and Zuni Native Americans. To creating life from chaos, or one of my favorite from the Maori culture in New Zealand, creating a celestial pair like Father Sky and Mother Earth, and they got together and created humankind. For us in this room, the story of Genesis explains our beginnings. It satisfies our hunger for answers and explanations. This is our story, and there is no doubt in my mind that God created the universe that we live in. And yet, I believe firmly in evolution and must hold both of these things that I believe in tension with one another. According to John D. Morris, PhD, using the biblical data that is presented and accounting for expected life forms, expected lifespans and generations, humankind is a couple of thousand years old according to the Bible, 6,000 years. Well, on my trip to Scotland, we visited Neolithic sites that were about 6,000 years old. And whether the 7 days in the Bible is 168 hours or 2.4 billion years does not matter to me when it comes to my faith. The point is that this is our story and we embrace it. And it was read today so beautifully by the people who volunteered to do that. But this is how we connect with our beginnings and to a force that is greater than ourselves. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? Listen, and God said, "Let there be light." And God said that it was good. The second idea that I'd like for us to chew on today a little bit is what happens now that the world's created. What is the next logical step in our story? We find in verse 28, it says, God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." Now, some have interpreted that passage as saying that we have the right and the authority to totally control and abuse